the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, episode 82.
Welcome to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R2 Global.
Welcome to another edition of the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Ray. So good to have you. And today, it's one of my favorite topics. We get to talk about Africa. And we bring back on Urenna Onyewuchi from IEEE and to talk about what happened in Ghana this year. We missed, or at least I missed the conference. I don't think she was there, obviously. Kind of give us an update on that. And there's a lot of stuff that's going on in Africa. And we talk about just a couple of the issues. And so if you're interested in that, we talk about metering, we talk about the youth and how they can change Africa. Cover a lot of ground here. I enjoyed the discussion with her as always. And as always, we will link to everything we discussed in the show notes so you can check that out as well. Without further ado, here is my interview with Ureena from the other day. Well, Ureena, it's been a few months since I spoke to you, and last time we talked, you were getting ready for the Power Africa initiative, which is in Ghana this year, I believe. I did not get to attend. Was there last year with you guys and enjoyed it, but what did I miss this year?
You missed quite a bit. There was growth in the number of people attending, the number of countries attending, and I mentioned that it's important because it's diversity in a conference, diversity in a company. All these things help to improve the quality of conferences. And so you had people with ideas from different parts of the world sharing the research they're doing in different parts of the world. Seeing Asia's interest in Africa or Europe's interest in Africa and all of that. And this year I got to sit in on a couple of the paper sessions just to understand the research in different areas, to see what the strengths are, to see what the gaps are, and to start to gauge the improvements, I guess, at least over the past couple of years. Trying to gauge things like are we giving the same types of feedback to people that we gave last year? And in some areas, yes, it was similar feedback. And I think it's probably not just an Africa problem, but where people are sharing information on improvements that they believe they've seen in recent research, and they don't have enough data to back it up. So, for instance, if someone's sharing a paper on variation in voltage, and most of the data is showing frequency type data, that kind of feedback on making sure the data matches what your research is saying. But in general, the papers that we got and that we accepted, we were very careful to make sure they were quality papers, and it's a peer-reviewed process, and it's not just reviewed by African researchers, but also American ones and different PES or Power and Energy Society members from around the world. The other thing that we repeated this year, Women in Power panel, where we had a number of women sit and talk to not just the attendees of the conference, but we brought in, I think, about 40 or 50 in secondary school. So that would be like the 9th, 10th, and 11th and 12th grades in the area, and just hearing them ask real questions about, trying to understand the challenges that women face in engineering, and some of them just in general being exposed to women being in engineering. So that was really good. I think that tends to be, one of the highlights of the conference. The technical sessions were strong as well. The theme was an ICT, the use of ICT in energy. And I keep mentioning that a lot of times engineers, we are so fascinated by technology that sometimes that we don't know how to communicate with with non-engineers about the exciting things we're doing. And so for instance, I'd wanted more young people at the conference this year, and we didn't have as many as I would have liked. But talking to some of the young people in the area, or that came in, that some of them were in computer science and IT, but they did not. To them, IT was one thing, and computer science was one thing, and energy was something else. And I started to give them ideas on the kinds of ways that we can use ICT and energy, and you'd see their eyes light up like, oh man, why didn't I think about that? And, because the fact of the matter is that the African population is mostly, I think it's more than 50% youth at this point, and we need the young people to be as engaged as possible, to be more engaged than ever in energy. And one of the gaps we have in Africa is on data on infrastructure, data on energy, data on consumer products and how they're used in homes. So this is how the youth can start to help. So, I was just sharing some of these gaps with the young people and trying to encourage them to get creative with how we present energy in Africa. But it was a great conference. The team did a great job. This year I didn't chair the conference. I kind of just helped guide. But we had a much larger volunteer team this year than we did last year, and I think that says a lot. And, for the next conference, we'll have an even larger volunteer team, because a lot of people just want to help Power Africa, and most of them don't know how. So IEEE Power Africa I think is a strong and good platform for us. And so we encourage people and people who are interested in volunteering to go on our website, sites.ieee.org/Power Africa to learn more about how they can help Power Africa.
Yeah, and we will definitely link to that in the show notes. You covered a lot of ground there. I want to circle back to a few things before we move on. First off, and we were talking about this offline, is that when you think about the term Power Africa, sitting over here in Texas, it kind of sounds, okay, Power Africa, let's go get it done. But if you listen very closely to your answer, and that's what I love about your answers, they're always very multi-layered. There's multiple issues to get Africa powered. It's not just about hooking up an oil well or putting up a solar panel.
Yeah.
There's training, there's education, there's workforce that has to be, government issues. There's issue after issue after issue after issue, and it's something that we want to attack. We want to make sure that we are going and getting people power. I always say that the energy discussion needs to start with getting people power. That's what we're trying to do, because we don't want anybody out. I live in Texas. It's 100 degrees. I don't want to be out in the heat with no air conditioner. And I don't want anybody.
Exactly.
I don't want anybody to suffer like that. That's terrible. And so we want to make sure that we are pushing that initiative, and then we have to step back and say, okay, well, that's the goal, but this is going to take 3, 4, 7 levels deep to get there. So I love what you guys are doing.
Yep.
You're attacking on multiple fronts, bringing the young people in, as you say. That's important, because education, education, and there's a lot in energy. When you think about this energy in general, it touches so much. It touches everything theoretically, but it just touches so many different industries that you can contribute to the energy industry by working in IT. And you don't think about that as being an energy job, but it is. Especially, you can be directly, you can be IT support, you can be building apps. And so getting the young people to understand, hey, this is an important initiative, A. B, there's a lot of, so you may say, well, I don't want to deal with oil, I don't want to deal with solar, I don't want to deal with stuff like that, I don't want to be an engineer. Just about any kind of a function that you want to do, you can find a job in the energy business, and for Africa especially. And you know this better than anyone. As we get more power to Africa, then all of a sudden the cost of living, which will be a good thing, will go up, because people will have jobs. Yeah. They can afford nicer things. Yeah. They can take vacations. And so it's a long lead process, but it's very important. And so I'm glad you hit all of those things. We'll make sure we link to it there. Real quick before we move on, where is the next conference? Is there anything between now and next June, or is next June going to be the next event?
It's likely going to be June 2018. We're still planning that out. It's likely to be in South Africa, but we're working on that. We'll advertise it sometime soon. So we obviously, there's a new team of a new conference planning committee, and so they're handling trying to determine where the best location is, and if it makes sense for us to do a conference in 2018 or wait until 2019. But right now, it's looking like we will have a 2018 conference. So in terms of conferences, we don't want to have more than one every year or every 2 years. What we will likely be doing, though, is helping to have or to hold different activities in local chapters in Africa. So IEEE is a volunteer-led organization, and so we can only do as much work as we have volunteers in local in different countries or in different regions of the continent. And so, especially with the conference we had in Ghana, I believe we have a few activities coming up in Ghana this year that we're linked to the conference. Nigeria, for instance, will be having a conference, not just on energy, but in electrical engineering in general, NigerCon in October. And so IEEE is going to be having different events in different countries. And the one way to find out what's going on in a country is by going to the IEEE website or the Power and Energy Society website, clicking on the local chapters, and then getting to the local chapters' websites from there. And that's where they typically advertise events. But in terms of conference, we won't have anything before June 2018.
Okay, well, we will link to that in the show notes, and I'm sure we'll have you on again if there is a conference in 2018 just to talk about it and let everyone know. But let's get into some specific issues for our listeners. Let's talk about metering. What's going on with metering in Africa? Because it sounds like that could be a critical issue as we look at this transition. And we were talking offline, and I told you I think the next 20 years in Africa could be one of the most unique times in human history, just because of all the different forces that are coming, with the government and capitalism and in energy reformation and all these programs. And so I'm really fascinated just to sit back and watch what's happening in Africa. But I know metering is one of the issues there. So what's going on, and kind of set the tone for the listeners so they can understand the broader picture here.
So metering technology, for instance, in the U.S. and Europe, it's transformed and grown over the years. So you had in a sense, old school type meters, and now you have smarter type meters. The good thing, I think, in Africa, what they can do is, leapfrog. They don't have to go to the old school type of meters. You can just jump straight to the newer meters. So where you have meters that have communications interfaces where you can, go on a website or to a server, or, where the meters come with servers, and you can connect directly to them and see data and start to analyze stuff. And but of course, there's a cost to metering. I mentioned earlier that one of the gaps in Africa is data, lack of data. And in general, I think, like for instance, for Nigeria, in most areas, you have, the meters that were installed a long time ago. Some of them are no longer accurate, but then they're still being used for billing. In some cases, people don't even haven't received or gotten electricity in like months, and yet they're being charged a certain premium for electricity, and it's like, why am I paying when I haven't even used anything from the grid? Coming up, and people are beginning to complain more. And in Nigeria, for instance, where they've deregulated the industry, people are starting to ask questions about, some distribution companies are asking questions about, should we have the customers be the ones to pay for the meters, or should we be the ones to pay for the meters? Again, it's a huge capital cost for the distribution companies, but it's really something that they need to invest in and put into in for the customers. Because if you think about someone who's renting an apartment for a year or 2 years, and you're asking that person to pay for the meter in their house, then what happens when they leave in 2 years? Disconnect their meter and take it over with them. Who is going to be in charge of the disconnection of the meter and trying to get the schedule right to get it out? You have issues like that come up, or even issues like, if and I'm just giving an example, if I'm going to buy a meter from somewhere, I don't want to say, China or whatever, but if I buy a meter somewhere and I pay the vendor to put in a software that, reduces my energy usage by 50%, who's going to know on the utility side or the distribution company side that I've done that? There's certain issues that come up. I mean, there's solutions, obviously, to each of these things. But what we typically see is where the utilities and distribution companies are the ones who pay for meters. We need to get to a point where the people are getting charged based on how much energy they use, and not just because the grid passes through their area. And then you have the issue of prepaid meters. I think that's one of the things that's coming up in most parts of Africa is how is there kind of like how you have cell phones and cell phone plans, pay-as-you-go plans. Are there trying to get a system where people can pay for power, and then whenever the money runs out, then they lose power. So you have technologies like this that are coming up. I believe some telecommunications companies, like the MTNs and so on in Africa are getting more into that kind of market. Is working with distribution companies and utilities to those services for electricity. Similarly, too, for some solar type devices, where they're starting to put or add in a pay-as-you-go service to appliances that are supplied by solar power. So we're seeing a lot of that. But my advice, again, as I would say, is making sure that that the African countries go and purchase the newer types of meters and not the old school types. In Africa with infrastructure, a lot of times what we get into the continent is used stuff. So stuff that's like 10 years old that other countries have said we don't want this anymore, and then they come into the country. When they're on the sell side, they say you're getting it cheaper, but obviously by the time you add shipping costs and the duties and so on, it's very expensive, and it's like you could have paid for a brand new one, and it would be about the same cost.
Right.
So it's just to make sure that
you got to repair.
You're getting new
you got to repair it and all this other stuff. Yeah, I mean, so you might save a little money up front, but it may only last a year. So, one thing on the meters, I'm curious to get your thoughts, because what you're bringing up is an important issue. Look, I don't like getting overcharged for my power bill. I can't imagine if you're in a country like Nigeria with an unstable economy, and you're getting overcharged for a power bill. That could be the difference between you eating, not having power, and so it's a critical issue that we have to get solved. One of the things we talked about on the show before is this idea of blockchain technology, peer-to-peer trading. And one of the things I propose, and I'm curious to get your take on it, is do you think it's possible that in some of these, maybe Nigeria or South Africa, where someone who maybe the rich guy on the block, if you will, has a little bit extra money, he goes out and he throws some solar panels up on his house, and all of a sudden he says, I tell you what, guys, I can sell you power because I've got solar panels on my house now, and you don't have to worry about the government selling you power and overcharging you. I'll take care of the metering issue, and I'm gonna get new up-to-date meters because I want the good stuff. I want to make sure I'm getting paid and all this. Do you see technology like that being able to infiltrate Africa with some of their regulatory laws?
Oh yeah, I think it's very smart. Something I advocate for is community-based, community-type options. Now, in some countries, we have some companies that have gone in. So the thing is, the government typically regulates wherever you have a grid, transmission line going in, the areas that are connected to the grid. But the thing in the rural areas, it's when it costs the government and the distribution of the transmission companies and so on way too much money to add transmission lines that go through villages, right? And so in areas like that, so once you present to them and say it's going to cost you millions or whatever to add a transmission line to this area, and so because it's too far from the grid, typically the government, from what I understand, having talked to different people from different countries in Africa, is that when if you're putting in a solution that's far from the grid, it's not government regulated. So I've seen companies that have come into Africa and are doing something like that. So they go in and they're leasing or renting solar panels to people and having them pay. So it's kind of like, they have a vice president of debt or something, and then basically the people lease to own. Maybe they lease and own after 5 years or, something like that. But your suggestion of community-based of power sharing that makes a lot of sense. Someone who has a lot of roof space or land for solar farms takes care of everything infrastructure-wise, incurs the capital cost, and just comes up with a certain amount of money to say, hey, I can supply you with solar, because some people only need the light right now for power for lighting and cell phone charging, not really for too much else. So I think there are opportunities like there's a good opportunity for that in the rural areas. So that's a great discussion.
Yeah, and on that, you talk about using the cell phone, and this is one of the reasons I had someone, a guest that wasn't familiar with podcasts. And he said, how do people access it? Does it cost anything? I said, no. If you have internet and your country allows it to be on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play or whatever, you can listen to the podcast for free. And so one of the things that you mentioned there is people having cell phones in rural areas, and a lot of people don't realize this, but in Africa, a lot of people have access. If they have access to power, they do have a cell phone, just because of the way the cell phones work over there, which is very good. It gives them the potential to be connected to the internet. Now, for the youth in Africa, let's talk about the youth in Africa. Do the youth in Africa understand the opportunity that they have with this revolution that's going on, with these foreign companies that are coming in and they're investing in these community type grids? Do they understand that they have a better understanding than anyone of what is needed, and they've grown up in this environment. They've seen the problems. They've heard their parents and their grandparents and their great grandparents and their aunts and uncles talk about all the issues. They understand it, but do they understand the opportunity that's available to them to capitalize on this and to help bring Nigeria or South Africa or Zambia further up the economic ladder? Or is it something that we still have to educate the youth on?
We still have to educate the youth on that. They don't have any understanding on that, and that's actually one of the things I would like to add to the Power Africa program is having a town hall type event where we can gather youth and young people together, and those in the community together, and just sit down and just opportunities and suggestions that they may have around these types of solutions. Because one of the challenges that we have, and one of the things that I worked on is helping to get sponsorships for students or young people who have shown promise, is that our conferences are paid events, and that's because the local countries charge us a certain amount of money, tens of thousands of dollars to host conferences in the countries. And so obviously for us to be able to offset those costs, our conferences, we have to charge for those. And so adding a segment to the conference of, where they don't have to pay anything, but come in and share ideas, and also just expose them to the fact that even if they're paying $100 or however much to come to a conference, it's beneficial to them. But right now, I've found that the young people really don't understand and don't know the opportunities they have. And for those who do know, they're not taking advantage of it as much as they should.
Right. Well, I was just looking at the stats here. I think we're in about a dozen countries in Africa. So if you're in Africa and you're listening, and you're wanting to know more about this, this is definitely the person that we have on today that can help you with this. Because when you go to a conference like this, and I remember when I was there in Zambia, there's a couple takeaways. One is you meet people from around the world. As you mentioned earlier, you hear a lot of ideas, and that's one of the things I wanted to talk about a minute ago. I forgot. But you talked about these presentations, and I'm sure if you go from year to year to year to year, you'll hear some of the same stuff and some different stuff. And that's because there's so much data to be compiled and to be analyzed and to be looked at, that this is something that's, it's not going to be fixed today. It's not going to be fixed tomorrow. And we need more people to contribute to this conversation. And the more local help that we can get, the better we can have to understand it. And I'll give you one good example of that. We had on a guest a while back, and she was talking about they went to I think it was Haiti, and they went to Haiti, and they had this idea of what they wanted to do, and they talked to the locals and said, "This is what we want to do," and the locals said, "No, that's not what we need. We need this," and they went, "Oh, we didn't even think about that. That wasn't at all what we thought about." So they went back and they regrouped, and then they changed their whole plan to fit what the locals needed, and so. Yeah. And I sung her praises because a lot of times people don't want to hear that. They're like, you don't know what you need. This is what you need. But the important thing, right? The important thing is that when you go talk to the locals, they have a very good understanding of what's going on. And so we need the locals in Africa, all over Africa, to contribute to this conversation. And so especially the youth, because technology will be, as they get more access to energy, more access to the internet, there will be a lot of things that they have access to. And as we were talking offline, some things that the U.S. has, if you're going to go to Africa and try to teach someone how to build a certain type of battery or whatever. Okay, that learning curve may be a little bit long for it to do in a month or a few years, but there's plenty of things that we do here in the U.S. that we just had to take it and say, okay, this is what we do here. You know what you do there, and there's just a small bridge, there's a small gap, and getting the youth involved in that process, I think, is really critical to the success of the Power Africa initiative.
I agree with you, and that's one of the reasons why, as you know, we created a collaboration page or on a platform, a band platform, but just to start to talk about things like this. Right now, we just have some past attendees on the app. So, what I think we need to do is open it up to the youth in different African countries, just so that they start to communicate and share with us what exactly, what ideas do they have, what would they like to share, because collaboration and communication is key. I mean, these two things are key to the success of, whatever, businesses, conferences, anything. And, we're coming in right now, and of course, we work with the local chapters to understand what's a good topic that we should go after. But sometimes those topics are still coming from the academic or topics like that, or, if for it to come from the community where people are voting on, I want you guys to have a theme on, ICT this year, or I want you to have a theme on regulation around power this year. But where the community is involved in a sense, planning the conference where they feel like there's a part of it, and then they're coming to listen to what they have asked for, because what you said is very important, is versus feeding them something that they don't need, it's important that we go and say, what exactly do you want? What do you need, so that we can provide that service versus giving you what you do not need.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember the first time I went to Africa, I had a list of ideas of, oh man, this is what we could do, this is what we could offer, these are the things. And I got down there, I was like, oh, okay, well, they don't need this, they don't need this. Wow, this is needed. I didn't know about this. And so, until you go and you spend time there, I am no expert. I hadn't been there nearly long enough to say, but, just going in there and talking to people, you start to build this database. And so we're going to link to, obviously, the IEEE, the Power Africa Initiative, in the show notes. We're going to link to that. And so hopefully people can go and check it out, as you mentioned. And is there anything else that you wanted to bring up before we let you go today?
I think you touched on a lot of things. Education is key. I think for people who are going and doing lessons in Africa or developing programs in Africa, doing education in Africa, let's make sure that we're giving the Africans what they need. One of the things that I always say is, right now, I feel, especially in countries like Nigeria and the West African countries that I know of, there are a lot of, there's several engineers. We have a lot of engineers, and probably more than 70 or 80 or 90% of them don't have jobs. And it's like, what we need is people who can go and be able to roll up their sleeves and get stuff done. So not necessarily engineers, but maybe we need more electricians, more technicians. And so for people to go out and learn skills and get certificates in IT, get certificates in putting solar panels together, in assembly, these types of things, I think those types of things might get people more, employed faster and quicker, especially if they're certified and they're qualified, than if they get engineering degrees where there's just like an overload of that. It's just like way too much supply and little demand. What Africa as a continent needs is more of those skilled type labor. And so for people who want to go back and say, how do I want to give to Africa energy and power, perhaps that's something to touch on, as well as mobile apps development, going and teaching them how to develop apps, and show them how to use them. We talked about almost everyone having smartphones. So if we have better apps to collect data, that's going to move the continent forward in a big way, even without looking at infrastructure, like infrastructure as we call it, the grid. So if we have the solar solutions that we can try to do, they're relatively cheaper than waiting for a grid to be built. So whatever we can do on a smaller scale to bring power forward, that's what we should be doing.
Absolutely, and we will keep the discussion going here on the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. Trying to keep folks up to date on what's going on. We love Africa, love the discussion. It's very fascinating, and it's there's so many different things that not just energy, it's politics, and it's people, it's getting people energy. There's technology, so many things that's going on with this discussion. I absolutely love it, and we thank you so much for your time. It was good to catch up with you. Sorry I couldn't be in Ghana. I hate I had to miss it this year, but it just didn't work out with my schedule. But we will look to have you on again in the future and to talk more about what's going on with the Power Africa initiative. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
The Global Energy Leaders Podcast is produced by Michael Sims and Chris Prine. Chris Prine also serves as editor for the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. Until next time, keep climbing.
Thanks for listening to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.